A year ago, I emailed Eric Weinheimer, who's the president of the Donors Forum, and I said, we're in Chicago doing this thing called MCON, and have you ever heard of it? And he said, I don't know. He goes, but you're in Chicago? And we never really sat down until this year to really focus and work with Chicago because MCON is here as well. And I'm excited that I bring Eric out here. Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Because Eric's got some interesting thoughts that I think we should share about the word nonprofit, which we'll talk about. But before we get there, tell me about the Donors Forum. What is the Donors Forum?
Derek, Donors Forum is a very unique organization. It is the only regional association in the country that brings together foundations, nonprofits and their advisors, as well as social entrepreneurs and impact investors and B corporations, and we bring them together in this integrated membership model. And because we have this diverse membership, we have the platform through which we can build what we like to call a vibrant social impact sector. Very intentional about that term, vibrant social impact sector, that allows all of us here in Illinois to do our best work and maximize our impact.
This concept of nonprofit sector, so what is your feeling on the word nonprofit?
The term nonprofit is inaccurate and doesn't reflect the true value of the sector. You know, if you think about the nonprofit sector, it's the only sector that's defined by what it's not.
Yeah.
And it is have tremendous value. Thank you. Applause. And that would be fine, but you know, quite frankly, the nonprofit sector is the backbone of a civil society and a thriving economy. It's 5% of the GDP, and we're saying, the nonprofit sector. In addition, I hate to break it to people, but nonprofits, they do make profits. They better make profits, or else they're going to close their doors. You know, these are not profits that are then distributed to shareholders, but they are profits, and if you want to call them margin, if you want to call it surplus, that's then reinvested into the business, into the organization, so that they can fulfill their mission in a sustainable way. So I think we need to get to a point where we take that term nonprofit and throw it back to the 1950s where it belongs.
Why, for some of us, does it feel, because I used to be in a leadership role in a nonprofit organization, and my friends and my family would say to me, did you break even in your budget this year? You know, why does it feel so bad to make money in the nonprofit world?
You know, for me, it's quite frankly, ignorance. Yeah. You know, in the sense of people saying, well, you're a charity. That's another word I absolutely don't like, is you're a charity. I think we need to get to a point where we're focused on the real value of the work that we're doing, regardless if we're a nonprofit or a for-profit. But you know, you think of any organization, they need to have the capacity to do their work. And when you have organizations that are tackling some of the most challenging issues of society today, they need to have the capacity, they need to have the infrastructure. And so it's a very outdated notion that, well, they should break even or maybe lose a little bit of money because they're a charity. No, they are tackling the most pressing issues, and they need that capacity. They need to make sure that they have the cash and the reserves to be flexible and adapt.
The Donors Forum, I think unlike some of your other colleagues in the United States, because there's more of these associations in other states, most of them have had foundations, typical institutional organizations, been around for years. We hear about these on NPR, PBS, whatever it is, right? The ones that are funding these programs. But you're taking it a step further by saying it's everybody in Chicago or Illinois. Talk about that.
It's about social impact. It's about social impact. And I think as we look to enhance cross-sector collaboration, it's about engaging people regardless of their tax status, regardless if they're for-profit or nonprofit, and saying we need to collaborate, because I think that the landscape is shifting in our society right now. I think we are in this extraordinary time of our lives, and you have government funding that's decreasing, you have increased needs, and so we need to spur innovation. And that innovation is only going to occur if we reach out to other sectors and other folks who are focusing on social impact.
So we're getting some questions in. The first one being, how do you advise somebody interested in starting a nonprofit? But they have another part of this too, which is really, do you feel the market's saturated? Let's start there for the last one.
Yeah, so my advice to someone who wants to start a nonprofit is don't. Don't. You know, the problem is that the barriers to entry are so low. I mean, I could start a nonprofit tomorrow for 50-year-old bald men because of the hardship. That it's bad.
I don't know how far away I am from that.
But I could start that tomorrow. And so the barriers to entry are so low, and the market is oversaturated. And meanwhile, we're still figuring out how we can find the funding. You have organizations who are doing great work, even though they don't have the capacity, the infrastructure. And so if you're looking to be part of an organization because you're driven by mission, you're passionate about a cause, and you want it to be under a nonprofit structure, then I would reach out to organizations that have similar missions and partner with them. And maybe you become a program of, or you have a very close collaboration with them. But the idea of starting another separate nonprofit, we don't need anymore.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute, because I will get emails from leaders, others that say, I tried to go to fill in the organization that started 100 years ago, and they weren't open to my ideas. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to those organizations right now that historically that's not been necessarily the approach?
So don't go to those organizations that are 100 years old. Go to those organizations, and you're seeing them all around the country. Really entrepreneurial, innovative thinkers. Most of them are millennials, of course, who are looking at issues and they're coming up with new approaches on how to tackle them. And there's a cultural, and I think that's the key, there's got to be a cultural alignment with you in what you're trying to achieve. So there's not just one or two organizations out there that have missions that are aligned with what you want to achieve. Find those that have that cultural alignment, that mission alignment, and people you can work with.
Yeah, probably not going to be much more open if they're not doing that. Yeah.
Right.
Ford Foundation, this is a question coming in, recently came out with more interest in supporting, and they are, some general operations support for organizations. What's your view on that? Do you think we'll get more of that to happen?
I do. I think that it is a trend. I think philanthropy certainly understands the tremendous pressure that their grantees are under. And I think that there is this movement that we need to get out of this charity nonprofit mindset. And I think that they understand that there needs to be capital that is flexible, that's long-term. We're building organizations in the nonprofit sector that are businesses that have this mission DNA, integrated into it. And so I think that philanthropy understands that there needs to be that capital, that flexible capital, that long-term capital that allows them to grow and scale their businesses. But I do think it is a trend.
Are you seeing that in Chicago with your members?
We are seeing it slowly, right? It's happening it's not as fast as some would like it. But for example, one of the things that Donors Forum is leading is we are focusing on attracting more funding for overhead costs, for keeping the lights on and paying salaries of administrative staff. And we have a number of foundations right here in Chicago who are leading the way because they understand that we need to provide these organizations the capacity. And so again, I think in 5 to 10 years, I am hopeful and I believe there's going to be more general operating support and more funding for overhead.
Question here, how do you recruit millennial talent to nonprofits even though the salaries are low? And then, how do you justify the high salaries to donors and the flip side of that?
As far as attracting millennials, to our sector is giving them ownership. Yeah. It's people, they're engaged in this work because they're driven by mission, and they also want to grow and they want to have a sense of ownership. And so there are so many ways that organizations, nonprofit or social enterprises, there's so many ways to give bright, energetic people an opportunity to own a part of that mission, and you just see them take off and give them that autonomy. Give them the direction, but give them that autonomy, and they're gonna really excel.
How do your members or other donors, when they come to you and say, well, it seems like they're spending a lot of money in salaries or overhead, and how do you have that conversation?
It's about educating our donors, right? And I think donors are getting it. I really do. And I quite frankly think that given this world that we're in right now with government retreating, I think philanthropy is being more open to having those conversations and being more open to being educated about the real needs. I mean, if we're going to attract the right talent, we need to provide them salaries and wages in which they can raise a family. And we desperately need that talent. And so I think philanthropy understands that.
If you look at some of the other models that have been out there, right, your Charity Waters, your Pencils of Promise, your Liberty, all of these newer sort of nonprofits versus the old 100-year-old ones, it's like they start out really strong, great marketing, great pieces to get individuals involved. Is it something that the older organizations just haven't adapted yet? Why is there sort of this difference between older organizations and these newer ones?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's your capital structure. If you're largely funded by government funding, you don't have the funds to be flexible and to be innovative, to do research and development. That's number one. Number two, it's a cultural thing. If you have a culture of an organization that's very staid, that's risk averse, that is constantly on its heels, then you're not going to have that innovation.
One, I want to thank you for everything. The Donors Forum model here in Illinois, I hope others take that up because, as we have all said, it doesn't matter if you're a for-profit, nonprofit, or whatever. We're all here in for this. So thank you for everything.
Great. Thank you,
I
Derek.
appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah.